who is the human being, right? I mean, who are we in distinction from other species? What makes the human being unique, right, compared to other species?
Who we are, where do we come from? Those are the initial questions that always motivated me since I was a kid, in terms of the innate curiosity that I have to actually do what I do. And that is one of the things that I do believe really correlates to philosophy.
Welcome everybody to our podcast of the Foundation for Philosophical Orientation. I have with me today our third fellow of our fellowship program. And in our fellowship program, we try to support and fund fellows who are working on the philosophy of orientation, who are further developing it, and who are doing interesting research about it. And Nicolás is certainly doing that. And I'm very excited to have Nicolás with me today. Welcome, Nicolás. How are you today? How's New York?
Everything is going great. Thank you so much, Reinhard, for the invitation. I'm very, very excited to be here and, to have a great conversation about research, about orientation, about all of the different contributions and venues that we can actually start exploring by connecting neuroscience with philosophy, and particularly philosophy of orientation.
Yes, exactly. So that's perfect, and that's something I think would be super interesting to explore, because you are our first fellow who is basically not working specifically in the terms of humanities or with books primarily. I mean, you are working with books, but you're also working with scientific objects, and that's interesting and it's very fascinating.
Yeah, you know what? I'm actually working with actual brains, and not only human brains, but actual animal brains, and not few, but so many, in the order of hundreds. So basically what I do for research is what is called comparative neuroanatomy, or evolutionary neuroscience, which is basically studying and modeling and understanding the evolution of the human brain by comparing what we see anatomically in the human brain with the anatomy of other animals, and compare that among themselves to actually understand what are the things that makes us unique, and what are the things that are common across different orders of mammals, for example, or different clades of animals, which is absolutely fundamental to understand the evolution of intelligence, and also the origins of the aspects of our cognition that makes us so unique compared to other animals.
This is super interesting, and that's something I would like to ask you exactly. So for your field of research is evolutionary neuroscience, right?
Yes.
So maybe for somebody who's not working in this field at all, which a lot of our listeners or people in the Philosophy Foundation, we're not familiar with that field, right? And so maybe what is this field doing, right, for somebody who doesn't study it?
Yeah, Reinhard. So my research connects neuroscience with evolution, right? So neuroscience is the study of the brain in terms of the actual function and the anatomy of the different brain areas, and what those specific brain areas, by working in tandem, actually produce the behavior that we currently see both in humans and in other animals. And then the evolutionary part, which is absolutely interesting, is what are the mechanisms, the selection drivers that actually led to the phenotypic expression, the morphological expression that we see today in terms of the diversity in terms of animals, for example, in this case. So basically, in terms of the brain, what are these particular parts of the brain that have suffered throughout millions of years of evolution different selective pressures to be the way they are? And not only in humans, which is absolutely the center of my research, but also on other animals, because as you can clearly see, every single species alive on Earth has adapted and passed the test of evolution for millions of years to be the way they are and to thrive in their own particular ecosystems.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I guess the question is, so scientists work different from philosophers. You work empirically, right? I mean,
Yes.
mostly. And so what, yeah, how do you guys work? So how does that field operate?
Yeah, so in terms of my field, we work with data, and we collect that data by literally measuring the particular brain areas that we are interested, and then comparing those measurements from different species on what is called the phylogenetic tree. And let me explain to you this very, very briefly. So do you see that, for example, different family members, right? The son, the daughter, they are related to their mother and father, and they're related to grandfathers and grandmothers, etc. So you can actually build what is called a genealogical tree. So the exact same thing happened with species, right? We have what is called sister species, and then we have a common ancestor from that species, and so on and so forth. So you can virtually construct what is called a tree, and to be technically speaking, is a phylogenetic tree. So it's basically how species are related genetically to one another in relationship to their common ancestor. And what is absolutely crucial about this is that we have very clear and concrete genomic clocks. So we basically know, in particular, millions of years of difference between the separation between species A and species B. So we can use that information in terms of, in millions of years, how species are related to one another to actually model, statistically model, and recreate the evolutionary differences that we have between species A and species B, knowing how far distant they are from a common ancestor. And we can have, for example, the species A is the human, Homo sapiens, but we also, and species B, we have the chimpanzees, which is our closest living relative, but we can also say species A human with species N, a particular type of bat. So all of that relationships, and we're talking about animals, but we can also include other invertebrates. We can also include, plants. Every single species on Earth, they have a taxonomical adscription and place in that really big phylogenetic tree.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's a lot of, I guess, modeling ways of modeling using statistics and so on. What is the evidence that you use for that?
Yes. So in terms of the empirical evidence is the histology. Histology means the study of the cells, the neurons of different brains of different species, right? So for example, when I did all the data collection for my dissertation, which I needed to move to Germany to actually work on a very particular institute, which is one of the best in the world, which is called the Vogt Institute, located in Düsseldorf in Germany. They have the biggest collection of brains in the world. And there, the brains are already prepared for scientists to go and study them. And basically, the study is this particular really thin slices of the brain, and they are already prepared to actually put those slices under the microscope and see the actual neurons, the actual cells of those slices of brains, to actually study the morphology of those particular brain areas. So after measuring that, what I did in Germany when I moved there is actually taking a bunch of photos, a bunch of scans of those slices of histology, and then recreated the entire brain by using different measurement techniques to actually gather what is called the volumetric value of that brain area. So we compare volumes to volumes. For example, in my particular case for my dissertation, I gather the striatum, which is a cluster of gray matter nuclei, which are really deep in the brain and which are present across all mammals. So what I did is, when I went to that institute, I scanned more than 50 species of primates and other mammals as well, to actually measure the striatum across all of them, and then compare them by using these sophisticated analytical tools.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, that you're working in a laboratory measuring those things.
Yeah.
I mean, so these slices of brains, are these done by living, or like people who was it animals that just died, or are they
That
real?
is
Or
Yeah, That is a very good question. We are working with species that have already died, right? And the origins of this collection is can be traced back to the 60s and the 70s. So they have multiple decades of these brains being already prepared and ready to study for all of the future generations of researchers. And one of the things that I would like to highlight is that this particular institute in Düsseldorf is one of the leading institutes in terms of brain mapping, which has so many implications in terms of understanding particular parts of the brain that we still need more data for, and to study them in a more precise way. So, which has potential implications for biomedicine, for surgeries of the brain, etc. In terms of particularly understanding which areas of the brain are where are located and how we can trace them in a more precise way.
And these slices, are they? So how old are they in that laboratory?
Yeah. So these collections, they are pretty old. They are more than 60, 70 years old. And in terms of the actual age of the animals when they died, that is also different. That is a very good question, because we are I am targeting particular brains that are not old brains, in terms of old animals, in terms of what is called senescence. The brains that are not through that stage of senescence, because the particular brain area that I'm focusing, the striatum, which is part of another bigger system that is called the basal nuclei, over age, both in humans and in animals, we suffer an atrophiation of that particular brain area. So it is not representative of a young, an adult senescence version of that brain is not a very good representation of the actual volume of the striatum. That's why we are targeting adult brains that are not on that senescence stage.
Okay, so the slices is that what's called an endocast, or is that something else?
That is a very good question. That is something else. The endocast is virtually a recreation of what used to be within the cranial vault, and that is including the brain, but also including some other external structures such as the meninges, right? So what we do is particularly analyze the actual brain from species that have died recently, and we have a very precise methodology to actually track and measure the actual morphology of particular brain regions, which is a type of data that you cannot get out of an endocast. From an endocast, either a virtual endocast or an actual plaster endocast, what you only you can see is the outer surface of that internal cranial vault, which is not quite representative of the full amount of information that we're getting from actually using this situ architecture or the histology of brain samples.
And then, so maybe one more question before we talk more about your own path to this field is, so you said there's the phylogenetic tree, right? And so we have these slices of brains of those living today. But then this tree also, it's about, some of them are millions of years old, right? So it's also about telling that story. And so maybe you can say a few words about how this historical part works. Like, how do you gain data about making these claims? And we all know those, you know, that 6 million years ago, there was this distribution, or this, you know, divide of different species, and then 60 million years ago, and so on. So where does this data come from? Like, how do people come up with this?
Yeah, so this you know, this field has been active for more than 100 years. So there are several ways, several you know, sources of data that can calibrate different trees according to genomic information. So basically the information that is related to the genes that living species have, and how those relate to other species that are closely related or distantly related. But also they're calibrated with paleontological information. That is the information that is coming from different fossils discovered throughout the world to understand the presence and the diversity of species that we have at different points in time, but also with particular adaptations and lifestyle information that we can infer from those fossils. So, of course, you can add as many species as we have nowadays into the tree, including also fossils, including, for example, dinosaurs. But all of that, those parts of the tree, they have different calibration, which are in place. But the part that I am focusing right now, which is only including mammals, we have both paleontological evidence, but also really nice genomic evidence, which has been, over the past 10 years, there's a lot of effort, both in funding and also in terms of research interest, into calibrate as best as possible the particular information, the particular data according to the relatedness of different species.
Oh, that's interesting. And so for the fossils, you use basically that's carbon dating as a method, right? That you use. And for the genomic material, how do you operate there?
So you can, of course, get a sample from a particular species and then analyze the genetic content from that sample and see multiple different type of data according to the genomic structure, according to the distribution of different chromosomes, according to so many different variables that you can actually study and compare among different species to actually calibrate the relationship in terms of how similar the species are to one another, and actually quantifiably demonstrate numerically how different and how apart species are according to specific variables of genetic information.
Is that so? Are there certain, let's say, extrapolations or calculations where it says, okay, as far as we know, the genetic material changes so and so much over so and so many years? Or how do you or is these estimates, or what is the there?
Yeah, it is basically I am not an expert of this. I basically use the trees that are being published by the experts on this. What I can, my understanding of this is that every single species have a particular fingerprint related to their genome. They have a particular genomic fingerprint, and how similar or different those fingerprints are among each other is a very nice quantitative measure of how different and how apart one species is from another according to a common ancestor.
Okay, no, that's that's super interesting to kind of see how you guys are operating, right? Because all we do work with is texts usually and language, and so you have so it's fast.
Exactly. Yeah. So basically what we do is to study trees that have already been established and confirmed by the scientific community, and we build on that by adding that information coming from the brain in terms of the morphology of different brain areas to actually model and analyze the diversification that we see on particular structures according to the information that we already know, that framework on the phylogenetic tree.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, thank you for shining light on this. And now maybe, we can, so this is, I mean, it's a quite specific field of research. And as I said, I find it super interesting. And it's something where I wonder, so you're from Argentina, right? Initially, so so now you're at Stony Brook University and in the field of, evolutionary neuroscience. So where were you from? What took you from Argentina to New York?
Absolutely. So I was born and raised in Argentina, and since I was a kid, I was always fascinated by evolution and biology. I am from the rural heartland of Argentina. It's called the Pampas, which I understand in German, Pampa is a very used word. So it literally means that. So it's in the middle of nowhere. So I'm from the Pampas region. And I was in constant exposure to, the rural lifestyle, to, the farms and the fields. So when I was a kid, one of my hobbies was to go to different fields and start collecting fossils, start collecting, arrowheads from the Native Americans that are still, present in different places of that distant part of my country. And since I was a kid, I prepared like a little museum in my house with different collections that I started when I was a kid. So I was always interested in that really deep history that we as humans have, but also other species, because I was finding, different teeth from different species, different skulls from, cows and horses, and I was fascinated by all that. So even before finishing high school, I was deeply interested in this, and I found in anthropology, which is the discipline that I specialize first, in terms of understanding the complexity of human existence by using science, by using data, and particularly by using the evolution, right? So what are the evolutionary mechanisms that explain human complexity? So after studying in Argentina, my undergraduate, I since the very first day in the lab, when I was starting my first year of university, I decided I was so passionate about this. I was determined to follow this through, and I decided from the very beginning just to do a PhD. And I really wanted, it's very ambitious of me, I really wanted to learn from the best in the world in terms of the particular type of research that I wanted to do, which is the evolution of the brain, the evolution of our intelligence. So after my education and my training in Argentina, I worked really hard to generate the opportunities that I was able to then seize. So right after finishing my undergraduate education, I started my PhD here in New York at Stony Brook University under the guidance of Dr. Jeroen Smars. So that was back in 2017, many years ago, and I am proud to say that I am finishing right now this really long journey that led me from Argentina to New York to the US, to Germany also to get gather all my data. I was able to live there for a year in 2021 and 2022 to now finish this really long journey, this really exciting adventure that was doing a PhD in evolutionary neuroscience.
Yes, that's quite a journey, and that's actually a good segue to our next topic. So we can talk a little bit about your dissertation. So you said you're basically about to finish it very soon, and so we're of course very interested in what the results will be, and also what you're working on. You mentioned a little bit earlier already what you're doing, what you're focusing on. Maybe you can talk a bit more about what you're doing in your work. So your dissertation is called, it's a long title, bear with me. The dissertation is called The Macroevolution of the Striatum in Mammals and Primates, Understanding the Evolution of Learning and Behavioral Optimization Across Extended Phylogenesis. And so
yes,
long, interesting title. So yeah, can you explain what is the core idea? What is the question? What is the thesis?
Absolutely. So thank you so much for that question. I am interested in understanding what are the particular factors that actually led and caused the particular type of cognition that humans have. And that to do so, I decided to study a particular system in the brain that is called the corticostriatal system. This is a system that connects the cortex, which is the outer part of the brain, that really pink and wrinkly part that we all associate with brains, that is actually called the cortex. And deep within that, really deep inside of the brains, we have the striatum, which is a very deep cluster of gray matter nuclei, which is basically the receptors of these cortical loops of information. So basically, information in the brain works in loops in connections among different areas. And this particular connection between the cortex to the striatum to other areas and then back to the cortex is called the corticostriatal system. And decades of research indicate that this particular system, the corticostriatal system, is the one in charge of learning, the one in charge of the optimization of behavior and the one in charge of decision making. So both the different modes of learning that both humans and animals have, and also the ways that humans and other animals control and regulate their behavior, and also the way we make decisions as other animals make their own decisions, is all mediated by these constant loops of information, which are literally working from the moment that you are gestated and to your very last breath. Your brain is working constantly throughout your life, and you have the capacity of learning, of controlling your behavior, and of making decisions at every single point of your life by using this particular system.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the decision making, you said, happens where again?
So the decision making, both all of them, the regulation of behavior, learning, and decision making happen in the interaction between the cortex and the striatum, right? And of course, other brain areas, right? But the particular thesis that I have, the main working hypothesis, is that particular types of learning, we're talking about reinforcement learning, we're talking about conditional learning, all of these particular type of learning modes, they are interacting at particular types, precise sub-nuclei or sub-regions of the striatum that we can talk about that later. And we can actually track the use across evolution of these particular modes of learning and the modes of sequential types of decision-making processes across different species by telling the information of, okay, the key factors of the particular adaptation of this clade of species or humans, for example, or great apes, is due to the combination of this particular mode of learning and that interaction to the environment according to how an animal can, survive and adapt to different ecosystems.
Wow, yeah, that's quite impressive. And how do you, I guess the question, how do you make these connections, right? On the one hand, you have certain brain information, endocast, the structures of the brain, and how do you connect them to specific ways of how animals behaved, right? Because a lot of this is speculation, right? Or
no, there is no speculation because we do have really precise information and a huge amount of data that is experimental data that is telling us that with a particular type of learning, with a particular stage of the decision-making process that has been studied in rodents, in macaques, and in different model species, we know that these particular brain areas are being activated. So basically, the connection between the axons of different neurons and the dendrites of those neurons are being activated while an animal performs X, Y, and Z tasks. And we do know that we have decades of research on that. So we can, it is not an assumption, we can definitely tell, guided by data, that the particular type of behavior that we want to analyze throughout evolution is being targeted and is being mediated by the areas that we are actually measuring on, animals that had been dead. But we use that really precise wealth of information to actually model those the adaptation of those behaviors throughout time.
So you study different mammals, different species, so across different, in mammals and primates. And so
Yes.
what are the insights so far? And I don't know if you can break this down in simple terms, but what are the insights that you have gained so far that is new in the field or that's significant?
Absolutely. So in terms of the main insight of my work, I can tell that I've been analyzing and discovering there are multiple instances of the evolution of these particular areas. We're talking about both the cortex and also the striatum across different clades of animals, of mammals. So particularly of interest are some clades of bats, such as the pteropodid bats or the flying foxes, and also the phylostomid bats, which they have a particular type of cognition that is related to the way these animals are actually navigating space through echolocation. And these flying foxes, which are the biggest of bats, they also have a particular type of cognition, and they are extremely smart. And they have also activated this particular system, which is called the corticostriatal system. Also, a very particular clade of animals that we have detected to have adapted towards the corticostriatal system are primates. And within those primates, we have a very clear indication of great apes, and within those great apes, humans, as very sequential expansions of both the cortex and the striatum that lead to more abstract decision-making, more abstract planning, more related to empathy, and in case of humans, the elaboration of language, which is also related to the corticostriatal system as well. And then we see some other species, such as, for example, carnivores, that they have adapted their behavior according to the exploration and tracking of different preys, and how their brains are actually adapting to making fast decisions to keep a particular prey, and then using that information to actually advance in terms of their survival to their environment. So, and we also see some clades, very interesting clades of rodents as well, which the striatum has relatively expanded more. So we do have very nice hints of the particular species that they have adapted towards. And then it is a matter of the interpretation in terms of the behavior that we can clearly see in those animals to actually explain the particular adaptations that this particular clade of species have been going through over millions of years of evolution.
What are clades?
So clades are particular groupings of animals related to their origin in terms of evolution. So, for example, a clade of interest would be primates. Another clade of interest would be bats, or a particular subset of groups of bats, for example. Yeah.
Okay. I guess one question would be you said depending on their hunting behavior that you can see there's differences in the brain depending on what the prey was, or how the prey behaved, or like what exactly is this?
Basically, this is it is a very interesting perspective to have. Unfortunately, the type of data that we have cannot go so deep as to go into the brain, into the minds, or into the cognition of these animals to actually assess and understand what specifically they are thinking. But we have very clear indication that this potentially can lead to explain some behaviors related to particular decisions that animals are making in terms of, for example, seasonal movement of different packs of carnivores following different preys, or the particular decisions that, for example, some species of primates, decisions they make in terms of, harvesting particular fruits or resources at a different stage of the canopy in terms of the height of the tree, and not others, in order to not deplenish those resources just for future use. So we are seeing animals making decisions according to the best way for them to survive, according to the information that they have, because you need to think that the brain is basically the mean that different organisms have in order to interact with their environment. And the way information is processed in terms of memories, and the way that information encoded in memories are being used is via learning. So we have this really nice dynamic between memory and learning processes that are happening in the brain throughout all of the different species throughout evolution, that lead to particular specializations in cognitive sophisticated behaviors related to their cognition that are allowing these animals to survive throughout millions of years. So it is clearly to see that the animals that were not able to pass that test of evolution, they are now extinct, right? So they are extinct. So the other animals that have successfully passed and adapted to their changing environments, they are living today.
Yeah, that's
so
yeah.
Yeah, in that aspect, I do believe, and one of the main reasons I choose the corticostriatal system in particular is because both learning and decision-making and the optimization of behavior, there are really clear adaptive concepts that selection has to be working on those particular behaviors in order for animals to survive. And I do believe that both learning and the regulation of behavior are among the really crucial aspects of human cognition as well, to lead to the type of cognition that so unique cognition that humans have. So that's why I do believe that the corticostriatal system is very powerful in terms of the analytical power and the amount of explanations that we can get in terms of how animals interacted and adapted to different environments.
And so you say that you can see differences when it comes to seasons, for example, when they eat certain things, and in terms of the hunting behavior and so on. So what is the base of this? So do you look at the brain structure and you see differences in depending on how they behave, or what exactly is here the evidence?
That is a really good question. It's a very nice way for me to to explain and clarify some aspects. So the type of information that we have, which is basically one representative, so one brain per species, is a level of variation that is very high. So it's what is called a macroevolutionary level. So we cannot, unfortunately, see deeper than that in terms of population differences or differences of brains of different specimens of the same species, right? So we don't have the analytical capacity to do that, but what we can see is higher patterns of evolution according to different species, and how all of these different species are actually related to one another according to the way that they interact with the environment.
Can you give me an example, maybe also something of what maybe you found out? So I wonder how exactly does it work? Do you look at so the scan of one brain of one mammal, of a bat, for example, and then you have a different bat, and you can, because there's a different structure, you can draw some conclusions on their behavior, or like how exactly is these are you working there?
Absolutely. So the conclusions, according to the comparison of different species, is general patterns of evolution in terms of how, when we compare one brain area with the other, how different species are according to that comparison between area of the brain A and area B. So in that aspect, we see general patterns of evolution in terms of specific clades, specific groups of animals going into one evolutionary direction. Meaning, for example, clade A has strongly, relatively expanded particular region B, for example, in this case, the striatum, and we can then infer and go into the explanation of, okay, that is a really clear empirical evidence that these animals have used this particular brain system to do behavior X, Y, and Z, and therefore survive to their environment. So it's in terms of the actual results of these analytical studies is general patterns of diversity among different species in terms of which specific parts of the brain, which specific brain areas have expanded more or less according to the common ancestor.
And based on these expansions of the aspects of the brain, so in your case, you focus on the striatum, and so based on certain expansions, you can draw conclusions about the behavior, or is that in connection with certain animals that are alive today, and we study how their striatum is operating?
That is a great question. So it is a connection between other sorts of data to actually substantiate what we find on the morphological aspect, right? So there is a connection there between how an animal uses a particular system of the brain, which translates to the more, a part of the brain is used, the bigger, relatively speaking, the bigger it gets in terms of the actual morphology. So when we track that throughout on an evolutionary framework, we can see that some species are grouped together in terms of the particular mechanisms that they use to adapt to different to different particular contexts and environments. And we can actually see that animals, groups of animals that are really non-related, they're really far away in terms of the tree, they're actually in some cases using the exact same mechanisms to actually adapt to their environment. So we have a very particular case, for example, on another brain area, which is the lateral cerebellum. We have seen instances of what is called convergent evolution between great apes and humans, pinnipeds, right? These carnivores that are in the sea, in the ocean, and dolphins as well. So we see that independently, animals have evolved really similar systems to actually adapt to their environment. In these particular instances of independent convergent evolution, I am exploring that right now, and I also see that also on the corticostriatal system as well. It's particularly in some clades of bats, in some clades of primates, in some other clades of carnivores as well, which is absolutely fascinating to see.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And so what was maybe some of the outcome of your research, or was there any surprises that you found in your own research in terms of when you closely analyze how the brain develops, right, in the different parts of the brain, and then especially the striatum, and was there anything that you found in terms of, oh wow, I didn't know this species would operate and behave in this way, or anything that was like very distinct? Do you have an example, maybe?
Yeah, that is a very interesting question. Thank you for asking that. So all the time when I'm doing my research and I run these evolutionary models, I find insights and discoveries that are very exciting. For example, I have discovered that particular clades of primates, for example, the New World monkeys, they have further elaborated some particular subregions of the striatum that other primates have not, in parallel to what great apes and humans are actually doing. And those things are actually very telling, because these particular primates from the New World, we are seeing those in Argentina and Brazil. We are talking about these like capuchin monkeys. They're extremely intelligent. They are very, very smart. So that is a very clear indication that what we are finding in terms of the morphology of those particular subregions of the striatum, which are the coated nucleus, are also related to how particularly intelligent these species are, in parallel to what other great apes and humans are actually doing. So, for example, that was a very interesting and fascinating finding. Another thing that I can tell you is that, to my surprise, many of the strepsirrhine primates, which are the ones that are located in mostly in Africa and in Asia and in Madagascar, they have, to my surprise, they have demonstrated very similar levels of expansion of the putamen and the coated nucleus, which are other subregions of the striatum besides the nucleus accumbens, which are also very similar to what we are finding on anthropoid primates, which is something that I was not expecting that to happen. So we see, according to the level of and the degree of detail in terms of what specific brain area we are comparing to another, we are finding really interesting results in terms of primates, such as these cases that I told you, but also some other cases when I do some other comparative analysis related to now mammals, in the sense of these particular clades of bats, for example, phylostomid bats and theropodid bats, which are also very, very high according to the level of expansion of the striatum that they have. And they make sense in terms of how their behavior is in terms of echolocation, for example, and the way that they use sonar to actually guide their navigation through space.
You mentioned the capuchin monkeys, and there's this certain type of bat. So does it mean a larger striatum makes them smarter? Is that how it works, or?
Yeah, well, that is a very simplistic way to say that. The bigger the striatum is, the smarter the animal is. I wouldn't use those terms. What I would say, and I would be more cautious in terms of having information data that is telling me that this particular clade of animals have expanded, relatively speaking, expanded the striatum, and that is an indication that potentially that is one of the mechanisms that this animal has adapted towards to actually manifest a more complex behavior. Of course, nothing is as simple as that in the brain. We're talking about, think about this, the brain is the most complex system ever studied in science. So there is still so much to understand about the brain, and especially if we are talking about brains of other species, right? Needless to say that the human brain is extremely complex, but also the brains of other animals are also extremely complex. So basically what I'm saying is that we have these particular hints that data is telling us that for some clades, they have used more of one particular type of system than other in terms of the type of behavior that they are exercising in their ecosystems.
That's fascinating. And maybe we can talk more generally about the brain and its function and so on. I mean the striatum and the neocortex are two different things, right? And
yes.
Okay. And so I guess and you said that the function is in a sense there are these loops, right? And so maybe say something. What's the difference of the neocortex and the striatum? Because then we also get to the question of what do humans do, because their neocortex is much larger, right? But maybe what is the different? What can we say about their functions in the brain?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I must say in the beginning, that everything in the brain works as a group, right? So you can, a really nice analogy that I like to use is that the different parts of the brain is different components of an orchestra, right? So you have different parts that are doing different functions, but everything working in unison, working in tandem, working as a group, they create the music that we hear, right? So in that case, the behavior that we see an animal or ourselves to express, that behavior is the product of so many different parts of the brain acting in tandem. We have a lot of evidence that we can tell that to a higher degree, some areas are specializing in some particular cases, right? So we have, for example, as I told you, the cortex and the striatum working in tandem are more related to learning, are related to decision making, but also, for example, other really important areas such as the hippocampal formation or the hippocampus are related to the formation of memories and the navigation in space of that organism, that animal on space. And also, for example, we have the cerebellum, right, at the back of the brain that is related to motor coordination, but also different particular types of learning as well. So we can actually isolate learning into different types, and we can say that, for example, reinforcement learning is more related to the striatum, or more other types of unsupervised learning are more related to other parts of the brain, such as the cerebellum. But long story short, everything works in tandem, right? So remember that analogy that I use as an orchestra, right? So you have the different strings, then you have all of the different types of instruments, and you also have the director of the orchestra. And it seems to be that the neocortex and the cortex is actually the director of that orchestra, right? So everything has to pass through the cortex in terms of behavior to be performed, in terms of information to be processed. So more than 75% of the brain is the cortex, and is the most recent in terms of evolution, and is where higher cognition is located. But that higher cognition and all of the information is being processed in the cortex, yes, but also using other parts of the brain that they have different evolutionary histories as well. And that is something that for me is extremely fascinating, that in our brains we have different parts that they have adapted through and went through different evolutionary histories, but they're working in tandem all the time, differently in one species than the other, but overall they're working in tandem to generate the type of behavior that we see nowadays.
So the neocortex is the director of the brain in a sense, and I guess what's interesting is that the neocortex is much larger in Homo sapiens than in other mammals, right? And so based on this, we can draw some conclusions about how the neocortex operates, right? And so in that sense, the behavior becomes more complex, you said, in a certain way, right? And I guess it's more adjusted to well, it depends on the environment, right? And so the ways it lives. And so human beings live very differently than other mammals do, right? And so yeah, maybe we can talk about this. And so to stick with the metaphor, because the striatum, what would be the instrument the striatum is playing if the other one is the
Yeah, I don't know exactly about that. What I do know is that the striatum is very clearly mediating the way animals learn, the way we sequentially organize and regulate our behavior in terms of, the goals and then the actions and then the motor commands. That is a very clear indication of particular loops of corticostriatal activity. And also, it is absolutely fundamental for the way decisions are being made in the brain that then express in behavior. We have plenty of evidence that the striatum and other areas as well, including, of course, the cortex, are involved in how decisions are made, right? That is also why the striatum is also studied for cases of, addiction, and also cases of, for example, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, because when we see a failure of the striatum according to, these particular pathologies, we can clearly see a lack of those particular behaviors, such as, motor control for Parkinson's, and also the lack of, abstract thinking for Alzheimer's, and also senescence, and the lack of clear judgment and decision making when we have someone that is addicted to a particular stressor. So also another really interesting window of seeing the function of different brain areas is actually looking when these brain areas are actually not working correctly, such as in a pathology, or such as in OCD or addiction. So that is also very interesting as well.
And could one say that the striatum? So what the difference from the neocortex, right? So both are decision-making processes. Is one more affective, or is one more abstract than the other? Can you say something?
Yeah, yes, of course. I wouldn't say that the cortex and the striatum, they are one more than the other in terms of decision making. They are literally working together to actually create those patterns of cognition, right? So when I'm talking about these loops, is literally the connections of the axons of different neurons from one area to the other that are connecting to one another. So these are in fact different brain areas, but in order to produce a cognitive response, they're working together. So it's not that one is more than the other. What we do know is that these two, they have developmental patterns. So how they grow in the particular growth of a particular species is different from one another. And they also have evolutionary histories that are different, but that doesn't mean that one is better than the other or one does more than the other. It is simply that they are different parts of the same mechanisms that are working in tandem to produce the behavior that we see.
Is there something one can say about these differences? Kind of like if, on how the correlations work, or?
Yeah, so for example, what we can say is that the cortex and the striatum, they are part of the same classification in the brain that is called the telencephalon. So that classification goes according to the development, right? But within that, they are belonging to different areas, right? So the cortex is in the outer part of the brain, and it has a particular developmental timing that is different from the striatum, which is really deep inside, embedded into what are called the diencephalon, and they have timings on the development which is different. And of course, the type of composition in terms of their neurons and their distribution and the size and the type of neurons are going to be different, right? So I mentioned that the striatum is composed mostly of gray matter, and which is basically where the cell bodies of the neurons are. And then the cortex is composed of different layers where you have different types of neurons, and those different layers are actually conveying particular type of information to specific parts of the striatum as well.
All right. No, that's fascinating. Let's dig into those questions, which I think are super interesting, of concerning the question of who is the human being, right? I mean, who are we in distinction from other species, right? From other, so there's mammals, and there's primates, and there's great apes, and then there's Homo sapiens, right? And so, yeah, what can we say about these differences here? Since we know that brain structures are quite different, and what can we say about, and you mentioned that earlier, I think we didn't use the term smarter. I think the term intelligence comes up sometimes, right? And so in that sense, what makes the human being unique, right, compared to other species?
Absolutely. So who we are, where do we come from? Those are the initial questions that always motivated me since I was a kid, in terms of the innate curiosity that I have to actually do what I do. And that is one of the things that I do believe really correlates to philosophy, because we're actually asking the same questions and we are answering them from different points of view and different perspectives. And that is the really beautiful challenge that I undertake to actually present this project to the foundation in the first place, to actually start creating bridges to connect both philosophy and neuroscience, because ultimately we want to understand the exact same thing, which is these really long-standing questions of who we are, where do we come from, where are we going to? And I discovered that neuroscience is a very important scientific inquiry and scientific dimension that is extremely relevant nowadays, because we do have so much information about how the brain works and how that information can help us to improve our quality of life, to increment the well-being of societies throughout the world. So I do believe that science has this really powerful and impactful contribution to society, and I hope to also be at the forefront of that innovation. So in terms of intelligence, yes, we can study intelligence from an evolutionary perspective. That is what I do. We can also study the differences between the behaviors of one species to the other, but I would be really cautious to actually start comparing different types of intelligence, because that wouldn't be fair to the huge and beautiful biodiversity that we have nowadays. I will never say that one species is smarter than the other. What I can say is that the sophistication and the complexity of the behavior is clearly different from one species to the other, and that correlates to what we see in terms of the morphological and genetic underpinnings of that diversity and that complexity, which is different. So we understand that. But what I can say is that every single species have adapted to their particular ecosystem and context that they live in, and that doesn't make them more or less than the other. So basically, nature has done its work in terms of allowing animals to adapt to different ecosystems, and those adaptation mechanisms were similar and different from one species to the other.
Yeah, and what can we say about the human? What's distinct about the human brain compared to others?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of humans, we possess a relatively expanded prefrontal cortex, which is a particular type of the cortex, which is particularly useful for this high-level abstract thinking, which is clearly different from other great apes and humans. So we have evidence of that huge expansion of the prefrontal cortex, but we also have evidence, for example, in my own work, of the relatively expansion of the nucleus accumbens within the striatum. That is also one of the staples of human cognition in terms of the behaviors of altruism, of language, of abstract thinking as well, and also some other key evidence, such as, for example, particular parts of the hippocampal formation and also the lateral cerebellum, which have expanded in humans as well. So we do have a really nice picture of which specific brain areas are actually driving the complexity that we see. But as I told you before, and it's something that I want everyone to be really clear, nothing is as simple as it seems, because we're talking about so much complexity driven by one single system, which is the brain, right? So many things are actually happening, and there is also this constant interaction of the organism with their environment, right? Because the organism adapts and changes the environment, and also the environment change and offers that organism that challenge to be overcoming over and over again. So that constant interaction between the selective pressures of an organism and then the selective pressures given by the ecosystem, that affects all the time how an animal can adapt and survive.
Yeah, that's interesting. So was it Lisa Feldman Barrett is somebody you recommended to me, and I love the book. It's 7.5 Lessons About the Brain, I think it's called. And she talks about how, and she also speculates about how the human brain is different, right, from other brains or other primates and so on. And so one thing she addresses is this idea of compression, right? And so maybe can you say more about this, what she's talking about there?
Yeah, absolutely. So she introduces this concept of the 5 Cs, which are creativity, communication, coping, cooperation, and, as you well said, compression, which are basically the key factors that she believes is unique in terms of human cognition. And particularly for compression is the process of minimizing the redundancy in the transmission of information between neurons to actually create summaries of our social realities. And it seems to be that this particular way of processing information and actually summarizing that information to create a particular reality that we live in is a very unique characteristic of human cognition, which is also related to what Jeff Hawkins, for example, is saying in terms of the way to understand intelligence in that particular type of evolutionary system, right? So that combination of memories and predictions, right? So basically saying that the brain is a prediction machine, and we use that type of information, which are encoded in memories, to actually make predictions of the future. So basically the brain, what it does is like getting that input of information, encoding that into memories, and using that encoded information to actually make predictions about the future. So it is a constant prediction machine, and that seems to be something that all animals are actually doing, but humans are exceptionally good and very unique at that as well. And so in terms of the higher level of abstraction in terms of the predictions that we can generate of the future.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that really struck me as quite convincing, this idea of prediction machines and making predictions, also maybe long-term predictions or in different contexts, right? And also the idea of compression. Compression is something, as you said, summarizing, right? And reducing redundancies. And it seems to me it's also this movement of abstraction in a way that's in there. Once you summarize, you also abstract, right? And so this is, I mean, speaking in terms of the philosophy of orientation, this is something which I think aligns very nicely with it, right? And so in orientation terms, the thinking, for example, is understood as something that we do by distancing ourselves, right? So thinking means we distance ourselves from the immediate situation, and we can make projections about the future, right? And alternative projections. That's also Heidegger speaks in similar terms, right? And so says that what the human being is doing, what being means for the human, is to make projections into the future, which he says is also different from animals, for example. Right. And so I think this is also quite convincing if you think about that. I mean, I can make plans what I'll do next year for Christmas, right? And whereas for animals, I mean, not in that sense, right? It doesn't seem to be that they have leeways of deciding between different projects
Exactly.
in that sense, right? And so,
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing that we can clearly say is that the degree of complexity of that prediction capabilities that humans have is something that is unparalleled, that we haven't seen in any other animal as well. I would be challenged by one thing that we haven't talked to, which is absolutely fundamental, which is artificial intelligence, right? So this is absolutely crucial because we have talked about the evolution of one type of intelligence, which is organic intelligence, and one representative of that organic intelligence, which is human intelligence, is actually understanding and using the information that we know of human brains to actually replicate that in what is called artificial type of intelligence. So on evolutionary terms, it is something that also Jeff Hawkins is actually saying, that the emergence of artificial intelligence is an evolutionary next step in terms of how we see both organic intelligence in the first place, but human intelligence as well. So it is also a really fascinating time that we're living nowadays in terms of how we can actually insert a new type of intelligence to all of the discussion that we see, and how difficult that is in terms of, for example, this mechanism of prediction. We now see that machines and algorithms are actually having extreme capabilities of making predictions as well. And this is a very revolutionary time that we're living in.
yes, indeed, for sure. And the notion of prediction, right? That's why it resonated with me so much. And exactly, from prediction you can go to artificial intelligence, because that's what they're doing, right? Even ChatGPT, I mean, they're prediction machines eventually, right? They have tons of data, they predict something. Maybe before we go to AI, I'd like to stick with the point of prediction for a moment. I mean, because it does also seem so nicely in terms of orientation, right? It's because we orient ourselves in routines, right? And once you have routines, I mean, this is what gives us the primary foothold, but this also allows us to make predictions, right? And so, in a sense, I mean,
Absolutely.
it seems to be very much at the core, right? I mean, or the whole language of how these people are exploring the brain resonates a lot with orientation, right? And so, and I mean,
Exactly.
one thing that Lisa Feldman Barrett, for example, talks about, that the brain as a tool, and you mentioned that too, like the brain is a tool that helps us to orient ourselves basically in the environment. And each brain, depending on the environment, will be different. And she's saying that the brain developed basically as a mechanism to orient yourself in space, right? And that whenever there was food somewhere, you have to remember, right? And so that's what expanded the brain. And so, I mean, these are orientation metaphors, right? In the same way, Jeff
Exactly.
Hawkins uses the notion of maps, right? That we have basically, that's in the book A Thousand Brains, which you also recommended. This idea of that we create mental models of the world, right? And there's all different kinds of models, and these are basically like maps, right? And so, which is again orientation metaphors, right? And so we orient ourselves in different ways about the world via models and reference frames, right? That we have, and then and the idea of thousand brains is that there's different parts of the brain which are all voting, he says, right? And they're kind of competing with each other. Right. And so I don't know, can you say more about this, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you're saying is right on point in terms of how neuroscience nowadays understand, brain function and brain capabilities. And what you're saying is absolutely right. So in terms of what Hawkins is saying is extremely interesting, because he calls it in the terms of columns, of cortical columns, in terms of how different particular columns on the cortex are actually making one particular type of decision, and all of them are actually voting to which one is the best one, and then triggering all of the steps to make an actual decision. And that correlates, perfectly with the type of research that I do in terms of how the cortex in mediation with the striatum is actually making decisions, for example. So as you really well said, there are so many aspects of orientations that are related to how we understand neuroscience nowadays. And that is a really beautiful challenge that I was able to perform when I was preparing my application for this project, right? I was obsessively finding connection points in terms of orientation and neuroscience to actually give a potential answer to all of those. And my particular research is actually answering a significant deal of that, because the corticostriatal system works and is mediating decision-making. And decision-making in terms of the conceptualization and execution of decision is a core concept of orientation. The same as routines, right? So this process of the automation of behavior and perfecting that over time and repeating that again and again, the way we form routines, it is also one of the main things that the corticostriatal system, the striatum, does as well, in terms of creating routines, creating habits for species to actually adapt to their environments. And the other fundamental aspect, the third point that I would like to touch upon, is that concept of orientation as spatial navigation. And one particular subregion of striatum, which is called the putamen, is in charge of the integration of that sensory motor information, which is crucial for how an animal orients themselves and humans orient themselves on space. So decision-making and the concepts of routines and navigation, spatial navigation as orientation, are really key aspects that the type of research that I do contributes to explaining why orientation is so important and why orientation is the philosophical approach that is so relevant nowadays in terms of understanding human existence.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating, and it's quite mind-boggling how much these metaphors work together, right? And so
yeah, exactly.
One thing in terms of the predictions, right, which I've read somewhere, I forget where, but that it's predicting not just where to find food or where to go for bad weather, but it's especially what for Homo sapiens, what's crucial is that we predict each other's behavior, social behavior, right? And this is how it gets very complex. And this also reminded me of Yuval Noah Harari, right? He in *Sapiens*, he makes the point, for example, that what distinguishes Homo sapiens from other great apes is that we're able, first of all, I mean, that have a very complex social life, right? And therefore the brain expanded so much and language developed and so on, and that we are compared to Neanderthals and so on, and I wonder what you think about this, right? But that we are able to do grand scale cooperation, how he calls it, right? That millions of people, billions of people can work together, can do trade, can use the dollar, can work and exchange information and so on, even if they don't know each other, right? And they do this through stories, through social realities that they create, which is also something that Lisa Feldman-Barrett touches on, right? And so I found this super interesting, and this idea of how we create these social realities, fictional worlds, basically, narratives, stories, religions, and so on, which help us to cooperate on a grand scale. And that this is something that you also see, in a sense, in the brain, right? I mean, it has, because this is how the neocortex is so large. And so what are your thoughts about these things?
Absolutely. So that is a very nice understanding in more general terms of how we observe social complexity in the framework of neuroscience, right? So needless to say that the brain is the main artifice, is the main creator of all of those social realities. Nothing happens without the brain, right? And the particular type of social interactions that humans have had led to the idea that we have social brains. No brain, no human can work or can live or can survive by itself. There is no way, right? So the brains, the specific type of brain and specific type of cognition we have as humans, we have a really high component of that being due to the social interaction, which is in massive scale nowadays in the 21st century. It is due to that, to the complexity of social interactions that we have, and also at the same time that shapes the type of brain that we have in terms of fostering and treasuring social interaction so much. We have clearly seen that during the recent pandemic, right? A lot of people were feeling actually, sick and lonely, and they have a lot of different, cognitive impairments just due to loneliness or feeling, lonely and feeling by themselves. So it is a really powerful aspect, social interaction and social cooperation, for how our cognitions work and how our intelligence works.
And is this also what, and I know there's a lot of speculation, but why Homo sapiens survived and Neanderthals did not? Is that because the social relations were different, or all the other Homo, what are they called, erensis, and I forgot all their names, but Heidelbergensis. And so, do you have any thoughts about why Homo sapiens were so much more successful in terms of survival, I guess?
Well, that is a fascinating question. We have some hypotheses, which are several. We still don't know for sure what were the specific factors. I think there is a combination of multiple things, right? From a very simple point of view, it's basically humans developed more ways to solve problems that other species could not, right? So we have a wider array of solutions ready to go according to all of the different problems that we can face really back in time in that evolutionary time, right? In terms of subsistence, food, raising kids, taking care of the elderly, so many different problems that some species were able to successfully execute more than others. In terms of also the dynamics of acquiring food, of raising more kids than others, how collaborative they were to one another instead of being of fighting to one another. All of those things are actually allowing for, in really long terms, evolutionary frameworks to actually see that humans in the end were the ones that not became extinct and some other species did. But again, there are so many other hypotheses here as well.
Maybe final question. In terms of, so, and this is more speculative, right? But looking at the brain, how it has developed in recent, thousands of years, there was obviously agricultural revolution, 10, 12,000 years ago, and then the brain has to adapt in that sense, right? And life became a lot more complex, and one can see some correlations. And so, what is your speculation in terms of where does the species of Homo sapiens develop? So in terms, now we have mass media, we have writing, and then there's artificial intelligence, right? And so all these things have an impact on us. And so when we think about predictions, right, there seems to be the prediction machine of AI is amplifying what also our brain is doing in terms of prediction, but it becomes more robotic in a sense, right? And so, anyways, do you have any speculation in terms of where the species of human beings will develop?
Yeah, well, that is a fascinating question. I do believe that everything that you mentioned, the agricultural evolution, AI, I think that all of those aspects are technological advances that humans are able to first conceive and then develop and then extrapolate that through, millions of people using those particular technologies at the same time and advancing from there. I clearly see that what we are experiencing right now in terms of AI, artificial intelligence, is indeed a revolution. And I honestly don't know exactly where this is going to be going, but I want to be positive, and I want to have a positive outlook here in terms of, I do believe that most of this technology is going to be used for a good reason and with good contributions. So I do believe that a lot of the really time-consuming processes in terms of computation and all that will become more automatic, freeing humans to actually work on more, creative and more, I would say, more artistic endeavors. That's something that I would hope. The other thing is perhaps with the inclusion of AI in every single process of work, perhaps humans can start working less in terms of less amount of hours. That is also going to be something that I hope a positive contribution in terms of society. But for me, it's really hard to speculate because I am really focused on what data can tell us. And as of right now, there's a lot of data, and we still need to see how all of these processes are actually playing out in the near future. But I do believe, indeed, we are living through revolutionary times now.
Perfect. No, thank you. Thank you. This is a great word to end. And maybe one quote, Nietzsche said that the human being is the not yet determined animal, meaning it's not defined, and its nature, its very nature is that it won't define, like it can define itself in ways that it wants to, right? And so maybe it applies to kind of what you were saying. But in any case, it's been a great joy to have you as my guest today. So thank you for taking the time. Appreciate the conversation and for enlightening me about your work. It's super fascinating. So I'm wishing you all the luck and all the strength to finish your dissertation and finish your research and your PhD program.
Thank you so much, Reinhard, for the invitation again. It has been a wonderful experience, and for me to be able to speak with you, to prepare this podcast, and thank you so much for the opportunity of speak freely about my work and transmit my passion towards science and understanding the true existence of humans on this planet by using science and data to explain that. I do believe that there are so many connections that we can make now and moving forward. So I'm really excited to be working with you and collaborating with the foundation to complete and continue doing this work, which is absolutely fascinating.